Hello, and welcome to 10 Lessons Learned, where we talk to sages and gurus, leaders and luminaries from all around the world to dispense wisdom for career and life. That's wisdom for your career and your life. My name is Robert Hosry, and I'm your host for this episode. Today's guest is Ferris Aranki from the United Kingdom. Ferris is the CEO and founder of Shiagetto. Have I got that right, Ferris?
You have, yes.
Shiagetto Consulting. Ferris has got a great story. He's got some great lessons, but rather than me introducing Ferris, I thought I'd try something different today and ask Ferris to tell us more about himself. So Ferris, tell us about you and tell us about Shiagetto Consulting.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure, Robert, and thank you for inviting me today. So, nobody knows somebody like themselves, so let me try and give you a little potted history, a little bit of explanation of who I am and what I do. So, here I am in London, United Kingdom, and I run Shiagetto Consulting, that you said, which is a small consulting firm that focuses on strategy and emotional intelligence. We are here to make companies more effective, and actually, the Shiagetto is the Japanese word for a sharpening stone. So, we sharpen other people, other companies.
Well, you answered one of the questions I was going to ask you, so thank you.
Yeah, but I'll tell you the story of why I came up with that name, if you like, a little bit later, Robert. I've been running this company for 3 years, and it's a real pleasure to do that. But the journey to get here is like any journey. It has twists and turns, stumbles and picking back up. And it all started many years ago, having left university as a mathematician and economist. And I went on to become a secondary school, high school teacher, teaching those two subjects. I used it as a vehicle to teach around the world and live in different countries, different cultures, and I had a fantastic time. But after 5 years, I decided it was right to switch over into the business world, which was really where my passions lie. And I ended up joining an energy company. So I know all about the world of gas, electricity, oil, power, because I spent a lot of time in their strategy team and I learned all about the industry. But my key takeaway is that I love strategy. I love solving complex problems. So I moved over into strategy consulting, where I'd spend the next 12 years of my life working for big strat houses, solving a range of problems around the world, developing these ideas and what companies should do. But it was at that point, during that journey, I realized there was a missing ingredient, and that was you can be the smartest person in the room, you can have a great idea, but if you don't take others with you on that journey, then it ain't going to go diddly. These strategies are not going to be successful. So I became fascinated by that and pivoted my career to actually landing ideas with people, getting companies and teams to buy into the same idea and work better together. And that's what I do today.
I hear you. I understand what you're saying about strategy. I understand what you're saying about not going anywhere if you don't bring people along on the journey. I can't tell you how many organizations I have been with that just didn't do that. And some of them are not around anymore, but some of them are just limping along doing what they did before. But your organization has got can I say a motto? Success equals IQ multiplied by EQ multiplied by FQ. Explain that to us, please.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think some of that's a legacy of being a former maths teacher, that I needed an equation as my methodology. But actually, when I sat back and was thinking, what does bring success from a strategic point of view and for companies? Obviously, you need to know where you're going. You need to have a clear vision, a clear goal of what, and not just at a company level. Each of us, we need to have life goals, but also what am I trying to achieve in this podcast? What am I trying to achieve when I write this email? And then you need to bring 3 elements. So you need to bring IQ, so the right level of ideas, creativity, your sharpest thinking into the mix. And that's what we talked about before, having great ideas. The second component you need is that ability to take others with you, the EQ, the emotional intelligence. Are you talking about it in the right way? Are you engaging people? Do you genuinely care for them? And then the third component is this focus quotient. Now, the ability to focus and deliver what is important to you, right? So to dial down the distractions and really give it your all. And often see, particularly the EQ and the FQ, very limited in companies and sometimes in individuals. So as a company, we go in and we help across each of those, or specifically one of those pillars, depending on where our help is needed.
FQ, focus quotient. This is a new terminology for me. I have not heard of the focus quotient. Is that a Ferris original?
It is a Ferris original. It is trademarked, but that's just to stop vultures. But yes, it also sounds a little bit rude, as my brother often laughs at me when I say FQ at him. But no, it is an invention. I think, nicely summarizes for me when I was looking at that missing pillar.
Oh, yeah, I find it fascinating because once you've explained it, once you explain it's the focus quotient and how it fits in with the other two, it makes so much sense. Absolute perfect sense. Very interesting. Well, I tell you what, let's just jump into your 10 lessons and let's
Yep.
see how much wisdom we can impart to you, the listener. So let's go with lesson number one. Lesson number one, run towards the wrecking ball. Not a lot of
Yes.
people want to do that, Ferris, but tell us what you mean by running towards a wrecking ball.
Yeah, and I should just preface these 10 lessons with I said, you and I were chatting before this interview, and I said, do you know what? I originally did this task and I thought, I'm not going to have 10 lessons. But then I came up with so many and then I had to rationalize them. So, I came up with probably about 35 and I got back down to 10. And I thought for the purpose of the narrative, I'd do them in chronological order. So, bear with me, listeners. These come from my life in an order, but obviously they've been reinforced throughout my life as well. So, run towards the wrecking ball, yeah, is a fantastic but scary mantra. It is about living outside your comfort zone, and this really was drilled into me early on in my school days. I was very fortunate to go to a nice school, a good school, surrounded by other people who were from nice families and doing well. And it was very easy to take for granted the high levels of attainment and what was expected from us. Almost to the point that I'd often call it like a factory line. We were just, doing well on a factory line. And in my naivety, I felt that it was a bit bored, right? And I realized that, and I was challenged by my parents to try new things, to really challenge and not just do stuff for the sake of doing it. And I found where I counterintuitively, where I enjoyed and where I got the most sort of push was that when I stepped away from the treadmill and did things completely that I wasn't comfortable with, which is so hard to do. But time and time again, be it stupid stuff like doing a bungee jump, taking a job that I, am not qualified for, just throwing myself headfirst in, and it's really been where I have got the greatest richness in my life. So I didn't use this terminology back then, but I came up with a mantra about running towards the wrecking ball actually many years later when I was working with a difficult boss actually that I had picked to be my boss. And she turned around to me and said, I'm a bit like your wrecking ball, aren't I? And you for some reason, you seem to run towards me. And I was like, that is exactly what I have done. But actually, my career is better for it, is even no matter how painful this individual conversations are. So, yeah, it's a nice learning that I continue to gravitate back towards.
That's wonderful. It's something that a lot of us don't realize that we should be doing. And those that do it probably don't use the metaphor that you have. I mean, I've heard run towards the fire. I've heard a lot of different metaphors, but they all mean the same thing as run towards the wrecking ball. Challenge yourself. Get
Yeah.
outside your comfort zone. Go for something different. The adage of if you do what you've always done, you get what you've always got is wrong because when I hear that, what I see in my mind is those old fashioned freezers, the fridge freezer where the
Yeah.
freezer would frost up and then you would have to defrost the whole thing. And as the frost builds up, your space becomes less. So if you do what you've always done, ergo not defrost your freezer, you get less than you've always got. And especially the way society and technology and everything is moving today, you must get out of that comfort zone to learn new skills, to be better, to improve yourself. I couldn't agree more. That is a wonderful lesson. And it's a great way of putting it, Ferris. Thank you very much for that. Well, let's go
Yeah.
to lesson number two. Lesson number two, don't be sucked into the headlights. I understand the metaphor, but I'm really looking forward to this lesson.
So if we fast forward to when I turned 17 here in the UK, when you turn 17, you can learn to drive. And it is a real honor. My parents, as my 17th birthday present, has arranged my first driving lesson with a guy called Bruce. I'll never forget Bruce. He rang on my doorbell, made a very powerful impression on me. And we got in his little mini metro and he taught me all the things and we started driving. And it wasn't on that first lesson per se, but a couple of lessons in, we were driving at night for the first time. And what I found was I was beginning to drift into traffic and he had to pull me back. And he shouted at me, don't drift, don't be sucked into the headlights. He said, this happens all the time. The first time you see headlights on the other side of the road, your brain will drive towards them. But obviously, that's a terrible thing. You'll result in a crash. He said this, he was very comforting. And he said, look, this happens. It's a natural thing. You have to overcome that urge to just get sucked in, to just, you need to be in control, not let the external influences. And that was such a powerful lesson for me. Again, this is something that reinforced time and time again throughout my career. And I often say it to myself in different ways. You know, a very similar way I say is that I kind of converted to nowadays is to be demand led, not supply led. Okay. It's always very easy to get sucked into the headlights because they're there, not because you want them to. And it's the same in life. It's easy to do something because it's there, not necessarily because you want to do it. And if it wasn't, introduced to you, would you choose it anyway? Be that in the choices of food we eat, the work we do, the people we spend time with. So a really powerful lesson. Fortunately, there was Bruce by my side to pull me back from those headlights in the early days. But who's your driving in your life nowadays? Yeah, who's your Jiminy Cricket who can whisper that phrase? And that's why I write all these things as little phrases, because they're the little triggers for me, particularly when I am in danger of being sucked in the headlight. I can just say them to myself and remind myself of that wisdom and what I should be doing and not getting sucked into the headlights. So for those fans of sort of psychology and neuroscience, maybe have heard of the two systems of how the brain works. One is an automatic, is a reflex, and the other is a really intentional thinking. Okay. They're called system one and system two. Now, most of our life, we use system one because it is too much energy and too much time to think through everything. Like imagine if when we come to walk, imagine we had to think about each action we take when walking. No, we do that through the instinctive thing. And that's the headlights are useful. Going with the flow is useful in a lot of times, but a lot of times you want to stop and actually think, why am I doing this? What do I intend to do? And that is what, for me, not being sucked into the headlights is about intentionality.
Yeah.
Is about, being certain, making decisions for the sake of what you want rather than reacting to the stimuli around you.
The intention and not the stimulus. I like that. And that makes perfect sense. Okay. So let's move on to lesson number 3. So everybody's heard of the golden rule, but Ferriss says that the platinum rule is better than the golden rule. So tell us about your platinum rule.
Well, it's not my platinum rule. I unashamedly borrowed this. But the platinum rule, well, let's just remind listeners of what the golden rule is. So the golden rule is what you were probably taught as a child, which is treat others how you would like to be treated. Okay, it's a great rule and it's fantastic. It's applying your set of thinking to others.
I'm going to disagree with you on that. But anyway, I'll let you finish.
Okay, but it's a rule that many of us are taught.
Yes.
But there's an even better rule, which is the platinum rule, which is treat others how they want to be treated. Okay. And that's probably where your disagreement will come from. But it's not until you realize that you will just stick in the golden rule, because it's human beings are great, but we are self-centered. We put ourselves in the middle of a narrative. And we initially think everyone thinks the same way as us. This is what creates tension. And for me, where I first really saw this lesson was age 17, not long after those driving lessons. I actually went to spend a year before university living in a little village in Nepal. And I lived with a local family as one of them. And I learned the language. I ate with them. I slept with them, lived in the same house as them. And we used to have meals together. And me being British, whenever I wanted something during the meal, be it some salt or, pass something, I'd say a lot of please and thank yous. And I did this for the first week. And then finally, after a week, the dad of the family just erupted at me. And he said, why do you keep saying please and thank you when you ask for the salt, for example? And I said, well, that's the polite thing to do. He said, no, in Nepal, we only say please and thank you if somebody actually does something worthwhile, like save your life. He said, it's offensive to me that you think this is on par. This is just a human being should pass somebody else the salt. Please, and he was like, stop it immediately. And I was aghast, stepped back and thought, how could what I thought was right in the world really irritate somebody else? And it was because I was just looking through my lens, not his. And it really changed how I approached other human beings. And when I years later read about the difference between the platinum and the golden rule, it just made absolute sense to me. So it's a mantra I adopt and a large part of the EQ work that I do with companies and individuals.
Well, I'll be using that moniker from now on. I learned the same lesson many years ago, not in the same way, of course, but interestingly enough, I learned it overseas. So I learned it while I was working in another country. So it's the same lesson. We are a diverse population in every country of the world. We are diverse. You treat people the way they want to be treated. So from now on, I will refer to that as the platinum rule. Thank you, Ferriss, but I totally agree with you. And the old treat people the way you want to be treated is just so myopic. People, you don't understand or you don't appreciate that people are different. We are all different. We are all unique. So thank you for that. That is to me just such a powerful, powerful lesson. So
I'd just say, Robert, once you start thinking like this, it really unlocks things like being more curious, talking to more people, listening more, basic human things that make us much better humans.
absolutely. I just love that one. All right. I can spend hours on that alone, but let's move on.
Let's move on.
Lesson number 4. What
Yeah.
kind of learner are you? Now, this is a brilliant question for me. It's a brilliant rule and lesson because I had to learn that. I learned what kind of learner I was throughout my career. I didn't go straight to university out of school. I went to work because I just didn't think I was that kind of learner. And it turns out I'm a mature age learner. I did my university while I was at work. I got my master's while I was working because that's what worked for me. Now, it doesn't work for everybody. So it's a great lesson, great question. So tell us your story behind what kind of learner you are.
Yeah. So carrying on my journey, I got back from Nepal. I went to university, studied my degree. And it was suddenly, maybe it was because I'd spent a year out, but it was suddenly felt a lot harder to learn than I had done at school, where I was spoon fed and it just came a bit more naturally. And it's really fascinating, but obviously it was something I needed to crack quite early on to make the most out of university. And I realized that the way I, had sort of a book-led education and being spoon-fed was useful, but it wasn't going to work in this environment. And my way of absorbing the information I was learning was to rewrite it and was to go out and tell other people about it.
To teach,
I
in other words.
To teach, yeah. And yeah, which would be a sort of a springboard and maybe an insight into what I would do next in life. But so that made sense to me and that reinforced. Now, it wasn't until years later I was reading an article about which was called What Kind of Learner Are You? That the penny suddenly dropped what I'd stumbled across, but was actually a well-known sort of school of thought in the learning industry, is we all learn differently, as you pointed out, some later on in life, some in different environments. But fundamentally, there's one of 3 ways of learning, seeing, so listening, we get so much information every day. And in fact, I think I saw a stat the other day that an average human being will absorb 5 trillion gigabytes of information, which is, more than out there. So how do you actually make stuff stick? You either write it down in your own words, right? 100 times. So say you learn something new. It doesn't mean anything until you do something with it. So you could write it down 100 times and then you suddenly get it and you write it in your own words. You could go and tell 100 people in your own way and then you get it even better. Or you could just apply whatever you've learned 100 times. Okay. Whichever one of those, and it might be a combination of those, is what's going to make your learning stick and be the difference between just skimming an article and forgetting it 24 hours later and actually taking that knowledge and doing something with it. But many of us have never sat down and thought, what kind of learner am I? So how am I actually going to turn it from a passive learning into an active learning and make the most of whatever I have just been reading?
Apply what you've learned. I couldn't agree more. This is something that, again, took me years to understand, but apply what you've learned and it sticks. My God, it sticks. And we can go off on a tangent here with recruitment and recruiting based on pieces of paper as opposed to achievements, but we won't because this podcast will never end if we do that.
There is danger,
No,
yeah.
definitely. If you find out what kind of a learner you are and you use that, it will absolutely boost your skill set. It will absolutely boost your results because you'll then know how to apply it in your life. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Ferris. Lesson number 5. What is the problem you are trying to solve? Tell me about it.
So this is a biggie, right? And it was first, it literally said to me when I moved into the business world and was working for a super intense, super intelligent boss. And, I remember the first piece of work we did together, I sort of got the piece of work, sort of started blustering. He said, what do you think about this? And I blah, blah, blah. He just paused me and he said, Faris, what is the problem you're trying to solve? You've just rattled off for 5 minutes incessantly talking about stuff. I'm not even sure you know what you're trying to achieve. And it bruised my ego. And I was like, how dare he? I thought I made absolute sense, And he said, just explain to me simply, what is the problem before you start explaining what your solution is? And I found I couldn't articulate what the problem was. And he said, go away, come back when you do know, because at the moment you're just wasting energy talking at me. And this became so clear to me. It became so clear, not just in my work. When you look around, so many people do not know in the moment, in the grand scale of life, what is the problem? What is their objective? And it's not until you know that. And that's really a lot of the driver of Shigeto. Until you know that, stop. And there is an amazing quote by Albert Einstein that I pretty much say to all my clients. And he once said that if I only had an hour to save the world, imagine there's something, meteorites heading. He said, I'd spend at least 55 minutes of that hour working out what the problem is, because then it's really easy. And not enough of us spend that amount of time or have that clarity. And, if it's good enough for Albert, I think it should be good enough for all of us.
I love it. One of our previous guests, I think it was Ori Eisen, said, take the time to sharpen the saw. So it's a very similar lesson. And that's what it's all about. Don't waste your time coming up with all these fancy solutions when the problem hasn't been defined. Your solutions may not fit the problem, may not answer what it is that you need to solve. It's just busy work then. And I've seen this, and I'm sure you have too, Ferris, in a lot of organizations that are just focused on revenue, focused on whatever they focus on, and they forget the mission, number one, and two, they forget why they are having these issues. So that is an incredibly powerful lesson. And to have learned it in, so early in your career must have been an absolute boon to you.
Yeah. It's so simple. And I probably irritate all my team, people around me, when I often stop and I replicate what that old boss did for me. And I can just see them go, oh, here he goes again. But the one they get it. Yeah. And do you know what? Your listeners might begin to start to see, and it was only when I started writing down some of the builds between these lessons, because this goes nicely with the don't get sucked into the headlights. Because if you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, then the headlights grab you even more.
Yep.
All right. So this one is very much linked to the other one, but yeah, it is a powerful one on its own.
It is absolutely wonderful. We're going to take a quick break to thank our affiliate partner, Audible. Audible is an amazing way to consume 10 lessons learned, books, and other podcasts, allowing you to build a library of knowledge all in one place. You can start your free, that's right, I said free, 30-day trial by going to audibletrial.com/10 lessons learned. With Audible, you can find your favorite lessons while you're at home or on the go. Once again, that's audibletrial.com/10 lessons learned for a free 30-day trial. The link will be in the show notes. Now back to our lesson. Our guest today is Ferris Aranki. He's the CEO of Shigeto in London. Now, lesson number 6. Ferris, lesson number 6 is confusing me. So I'm really going to need you to tell us what it's all about. Yeah. What are your 3 adjectives?
This is a question everyone should be asking themselves, and they're probably listening right now going, what is he talking about? Just like you do.
Just like me.
Let me tell you a story. So I told you about my career and I joined consulting. So at this point, I joined consulting. Now, consulting is a career I love, but equally I hate, and it confuses me in many ways. Now, one of the big things about it is the performance review aspect. Now, professional services careers are a little bit different to other jobs, is that you don't have one line manager. You don't have one person who says, you've done your job, you're doing great, well done, you get a promotion, you get a pay rise, blah, blah. Instead, because you're working on so many different things and nobody has a single thread view of your life, they have something that is called round tables, where at the end of the year, you're judged against all your peers in a room by your seniors. And what happens is you prepare a bit of material saying, I've done this year, somebody reads it out on your behalf, and then they discuss and say, well, I think Ferris is great, let's give him this, let's do it. Right? Now, I imagine this was a fantastic, well-run process. And I was fascinated to discover when I stepped into that room that what actually happened was many people had never heard of you. Right? In large organizations, not heard of you. And the first thing that would be said before your little script was read out was, "Oh, who's Faris again?" And whoever was your spokesperson would say, "Oh, he's the guy who is A, B, C," and read out 3 adjectives. And suddenly everyone would nod and go, "Oh, I know who you're talking about." Right? And what fascinated me is whatever those 3 adjectives that were said about you were usually always the same, but also they massively influenced how people thought about you. Doesn't matter what was read next. If the adjectives used were, "Oh, he's the quiet one," or he's the disruptive one, even if they then read some very positive things about you, that would influence them. But what I also discovered is that your adjectives moved around an organization quicker than you did. So everyone would suddenly, you'd meet them for the first time and say, "Oh, I've heard about you. You're the," or they might not say it to your face, but they would play out the 3 adjectives in your head. And I became fascinated by this. I wanted to know what my 3 adjectives were. I wanted to know, could I change them? I wanted to know how I could influence them. And I learned a lot about that. And I can tell, we can go off on a tangent. I can tell you a bit about that journey. But what I realized very early on is we all have 3 adjectives. The sooner we know it, the better. And I advise all junior people early on in their careers, learn your 3 adjectives, own them, be proud of them, and make them work for you.
I'm laughing because this is so true. This is so absolutely true. And it's not something I've ever actually thought of, but I've absolutely engaged in it. I have been one of the people that says, "Oh, they are the one that does this, isn't this?" I've also been the one who's probably a pain in the ass to other people, and that's probably how they describe me. But yeah, that's brilliant. I have never heard this. I've never come across anyone who has taught me this. So I want to thank you. That's why I love doing this show. I learn something every time. What are your 3 adjectives?
Yeah. So my 3 adjectives are, and always have been, right? Laid back, analytical, sociable. And now the reason I say they've always been, because when I started my career, they were often, particularly laid back was used as a negative thing.
Yep.
"Oh, well, we can't promote you because you're too laid back. You're too," and I spent ages trying to change that adjective, but I couldn't because human beings are. But what I did do was change the meaning of that adjective. And I'd say to people, yeah, in a crisis, you want someone who's laid back. Yeah. When a teams are feeling down, you want someone who's laid back and in tune with it. So I turned what was previously a weakness into a strength.
Because you owned it.
Because I owned it and I leant into it and I acknowledged it. So, but I did, I'll tell your listeners, I spent a couple of years trying to fight it and trying to change it. And that was wasted energy in hindsight. But I perhaps had to go through that journey to realize the power of the 3 adjectives.
Well, that's why we're here, Faris. We're paying the stupid tax for our listeners.
True.
We're trying to let you know, dear listener, that if you listen to some of these lessons, all of these lessons, if you go back through our catalog and listen to all the previous lessons, you'll come to realize that there are things that you don't know. And maybe some of the wisdom that is being shared by guests like Faris will help you overcome those stumbling blocks. So thank you, Faris. That is brilliant. I'm actually going to be using that probably tomorrow. So thanks a lot.
By all means. And something just struck me while you were saying about how much wisdom there must be in all these podcasts that you've created. I mean, that alone is probably 1 trillion, whatever gigabytes. So for your listeners, put it with what kind of learner you are and apply some of those learnings in however you like to learn so that you get even more out of it than just a nice listen for half an hour. It actually, you start embracing and adopting some of those habits and applying them to your own life.
Thanks for the plug, but I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Thank you. Well, let's move on to lesson number 7, which I love. I just love it. So pre-decide. Don't half decide. Brilliant.
This is a big one for a strategist. And I first stumbled across this working on a strategy project actually in the UK for the Department of Health, no less. And your listeners are probably going to chuckle when I say this. I was working about 14 years ago, on a project called Pandemic Flu Preparedness for the UK government. So we were preparing the UK for a pandemic. And it was the first time in my career I'd been introduced to a concept called wargaming.
Hmm.
Now, wargaming is a tool we use in the strategy world to simulate what might happen and how we might react so we can test strategies in advance. Okay, and this is where the pre-decide came from. Right? We were preparing for what would be a pandemic, an emergency, a difficult, stressful situation. We wanted to pre-made decisions before that stressful situation so that we weren't making bad decisions during a period of stress. So we designed these war games and we played out, and there's a whole another story, probably a whole podcast I can tell you about that activity and actually the pandemic flu preparedness. But it was really powerful because it meant, and I do this time and time again with companies, that you have a playbook that when you need to, you can just dig into and say, well, I've already made that decision. Let's go with it. And I've made it based on fact and time and non-press. And this is something we can all do in our own life, right? You shouldn't have to be put under stress, go, oh, would I rather A or B? It's much better to have made that decision well in advance so that when the time comes, if you ever have to choose between A and B, you already know.
Look,
Yeah.
I agree with that, but can I challenge you on one point?
Yeah.
I've always said that you can only make the best decision you can make with the information you have at the time. But
Agreed.
as you get more data, you may change your mind. The more information you have and the more recent that information, your decision may be different. So how does that play into pre-decide and don't half decide?
I completely agree, right? So you update your pre-decide regularly if you get new pieces of information, but very rarely do we get fundamentally completely different pieces of information, And if I talk about at a personal level, and it kind of goes maybe with the headlights thing. Somebody says to you, what should we do tonight? Or, do you fancy, and this is very simplistic, should we get a Italian takeaway or a Mexican takeaway? And you're suddenly like, ooh, whereas if you'd sat beforehand, completely under stress, you'd probably say, well, I love Italian way more than I love Mexican. Right? That's the logical choice. But in the moment, the other person might be putting pressure on you and say, come on, So, in that circumstance, there's not really any new information you're going to get apart from the pressure you're getting from the other person. And actually, the reverse of this is where a lot of salespeople and a lot of very experienced influencers work. They apply pressure to force you to make a decision that you wouldn't make ordinarily. That's what the whole Black Friday is about that we've just passed. It's this fake fear, fake, scarcity that you suddenly, rationally, if you sat back and said, do I actually need this item? What is it? What problem is it going to solve in my life? You'd probably decide, I don't need to buy this. But under the pressure, under the intensity, you're not getting new information. You're actually getting, fake information that someone is playing and manipulating you. You do end up buying it.
Oh,
And
you've
I know
just
that 'cause
pissed off a
I'm-
lot of marketers now. You know that, right?
I've pissed off a lot. Sorry, guys. But, I'm looking around my apartment as we talk and I see a lot of items that I bought in a previous Black Friday. So that's probably why I'm thinking. And the other half of this thing is the half decide, right? The other half of the saying is slightly the same. It's along the same axis, but slightly different. Now, when I was a child in my house, my mother, God bless her, she had this rule that we can only eat chocolate on a Sunday in an attempt to keep us healthy, right? Now, that for me is a half decision because what happened was, as children, we'd lobby for more chocolate, obviously. And my mum would sometimes say, well, okay, well, we're doing something tomorrow on Sunday, so I'll let you have it the Saturday instead. And then it became Saturday and Sunday. And we'd keep chipping away. And before we knew it, we were eating chocolate every day of the week. And what I mean by that's because it was a half decision. She had created an opportunity to test the rule and then think. Whereas if she'd made a simple rule of either there was no chocolate in this house, there was no way we could challenge that. That was a concrete rule. And from a focus quotient point of view, it takes away all this noise. How much effort did we spend as kids lobbying for that extra chocolate when we could have been doing something else with that time? Or she could have gone the other way, which is where we ended up eventually just saying, look, you can have chocolate whenever you want. Right? Because that's where we eventually ended up. So that's often what happens with half decision. Now I use a jokey one to show, but that's often what happens with half decisions.
Yeah.
People exploit it. You waste a lot of energy debating things. Whereas if you'd pre-decided, make it concrete, then actually you get a lot of time, energy, focus back.
Absolutely brilliant. Very brilliant. And love the anecdote. You're making me laugh because you're bringing up so many of my childhood memories, but brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Let's move on to lesson number 8. Would you use your genie in a bottle? Yes, Ferris, I would definitely use my genie in a bottle.
That's good to know, but it's about a specific moment in time. I know in general we'll all use that genie. Now what do I mean by genie? So
Mm.
let's bring that to life, right?
Yeah.
And many of your listeners will know the story of Aladdin, either through the Disney version or the actual original story. But in that story, the hero finds a bottle, a lamp that has a genie in it who grants him 3 wishes. Okay, that he can use at any time. Now, imagine having 3 wishes. That's quite a powerful, and in the story, he uses them for different things. But imagine you have that in your life. Like, what? How? I don't know about you, but I'd be like, how difficult would it be to use those 3 wishes and not regret? Particularly if you knew you could only use it during your entire life, right? Would you use them all in your teenage years and then regret them the next 60, 70 years of your life? You're like, oh, I could have used it there. I could have used it there. How about, and that's with 3 wishes. How about if you only had 1 wish? So I often say to myself, I do have a genie with 1 wish. Now, when things go wrong in my life, the mantra I say to myself, is this so bad that I would use the genie on this? Is this the thing? And if the answer is ever no, I go, well, it can't be that bad. Reel myself back from the precipice. Okay. And it's such a powerful thing to remind me, this isn't that bad, right? In the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't use my genie here. This can't be that bad. This can't be the end of me. And that first came to me that, again, I didn't have the mantra back then, but my first big career failure. And I mean, big. And you think in the moment, you think these things define you, are terrible. You cannot go on. Your rest of your life is screwed. Your rest of your career is screwed, And if I had at the time been able to articulate myself the genie thing, it would have been instantly more comfortable instead of having to take a gradual, it's okay. But now I neatly summarize it as the genie, and it is, and I tell other people it, but it is really an instant switch for me when things are bad, and I go, actually, it's not genie time yet.
Wow. I rarely say this, but when I do, I mean it. If you're listening to this or if you're watching this, go back to the beginning of this lesson and listen to it again, because there's a lot there. This is a very powerful tool that Ferris just shared with us, and it is a tool with the issues we have in the world today with mental health and, the need to feel that you're progressing or the need to feel that things are going to work out. This is an absolutely brilliant tool. So I will urge you, listener, to please go back, listen to this again, listen to Ferris's explanation again. I'm not going to make any glib comments. I think it's a brilliant tool, Ferris. I think it's fantastic. I congratulate you on creating it. I've not heard anything like this. We all have heard this too shall pass, get over it. Actually, 2 lessons on our podcast. We've heard all of these. We know how we should react to this, but what you have given us is a tool. It's not self-will that will get us over it. It's a system that we can implement to ask ourselves, bring us back into reality. Would I use it now? Is now the time? Yes or no? It's a yes or no answer.
Yeah.
If it's no, it's not that bad. I'm speechless because I'm so in love with this tool. Thank you for sharing that with us. That is just so powerful. That's very powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Let's move on to, do you want to say anything more about this before we move on?
It is a really powerful tool. Glad you like it. What also springs to mind is that if people are looking for another tool, I often talk about failure anniversaries. Is this something you've heard of, Robert?
No, but it sounds just as powerful. Go ahead.
So,
there you go. Two lessons for the price of one.
2 lessons for the price of one. So if you were to ever open my diary, and if people are welcome, you will see something in there. I color code my diary, and you have something which are failure anniversaries, which are if something bad has happened in my life and doesn't need the genie, but still it feels bad, I immediately open my calendar and I put a meeting with myself 6 months or a year or 3 months, depending how severe it is, in the future to celebrate that failure. Now, what happens is, imagine something devastating has happened to you, or you think it's bad, and a year from now, you were to open up your diary and you go, oh, that thing a year ago, that no longer seems as bad, right? Now, the power of this isn't putting it in and waiting for that year to pass so that you can go, oh, that wasn't so bad. if you start doing this regularly, I pretty much guarantee you, not long after something bad has happened to you, you'll have a failure anniversary come up in the next week from something a year ago. And you'll be like, while you're reflecting on the bad thing that's happened today, you look at that anniversary and you go, actually, that thing that happened a year ago that I thought was terrible, that no longer bears any real resemblance in my life or any power. Well, if I got through that, then I'm pretty certain I can get through this. And it gives you just a bit more of encouragement and a visual tool for me about, as well as celebrating things that have happened in your life that make you. So yeah, that's what my calendar looks like along with other
That's fantastic. You have a genie and you have a failure anniversary. That's
things.
fantastic. Look, I love both of those, and I think they're excellent strategies to implement to keep you focused, I suppose, to keep you from sliding backwards. So again, thank you and great stuff. Lesson number 9. We're almost there, Ferris. Actually, before we go into lesson number 9, I should have started with this, but I'll throw it in now. We ask a lot of our guests 2 questions. This is one of them.
Okay.
So, what would you tell your younger self? What would you tell younger Ferris if you had the chance to tell him anything that you have learned so far? What would be one piece of advice or one piece of wisdom you would give a younger you if you had the chance?
I mean, I'll be listening to the 10 Lessons Learned podcast with Robert Hossery, but
Thank you.
a future version of yourself will record his top 10 lessons. So get them early so you don't have to learn. I think if I were to go meta and summarize all these 10 things, it's twofold. It's be more curious and listen more. Ask more questions, learn more stuff, because everything will enrich you and you'll get to these lessons quicker. Okay. So actually, I don't want you to listen to the podcast. I want you to learn them, experience them, but do it a little bit quicker and learn other lessons. And the only way to do that is get out there, talk to more people, ask more questions, and your life will be richer for it.
Love it. I think that's brilliant. I just, they're the 2 words I use, brilliant and love it. And I know I repeat myself, but they're great. They're absolutely great. All right. Well, let's move on to lesson number 9. Ferris.
Yeah.
Who is your tribe?
Oh, that's a great question. And one that, who is your tribe? Everyone should answer that about themselves. Who is your tribe? And it's not something I really actively thought about until I set up my own business. Setting up your own business is great in so many ways. You are your own boss. It's exhilarating when stuff goes right. But then the flip side is it is incredibly lonely. You go from certainly in my case, I went from working in organizations surrounded by people in teams, working day in, day out with them, to just being on my own in the early days. And I struggled not just for the social side, being lonely, but advice about what I should do in the company and sharing successes and failures. And so I took a step back and said, look, I clearly need a community. I need a tribe. And let's go find one, right? Because previously it just always been there. I'd just taken it for granted.
Yeah.
So funnily enough, I went and found a friend who was doing something similar in a different field, and we would work side by side once a week in a coffee shop. I then found a second friend. I'd work with them on a Thursday, the first friend on a Friday. Then I found a third friend and a fourth friend. And before I knew it, I had 30 friends, and I just threw them all together. And now we have a little community who all support each other. Okay. That, unbeknownst to me, was my tribe. I'd created my tribe, and my life is so much richer for it. My business is better for it. And when I look around, a lot of the difference that I see between not just successful people and unsuccessful, but happy people and unhappy at different periods in life are because maybe they haven't got a tribe at that point in time, or they're not well connected into their tribe. And it's easy to forget because tribes come and go. We have long lives, and we need to constantly be recentering ourselves in different groups and different communities. So it is a good question to ask yourself periodically, who are my tribe? What do I get from them?
It is very important, and it's something that a lot of us take for granted. I never put it that way, but I always found my tribe. And now I'm like you, creating tribes, not for me so much, but for my community. So yeah, look, that again, it's a great lesson to learn. It's something that you should ask yourself quite often and listen to your answer. Don't just ask the question, listen to what you say. Okay, well, let's move on to the 10th and final lesson. And this has got to, this should be attributed to a famous name, and it probably will be. It'll be attributed to you, Ferris. So lesson number 10, it's about the things you do, not the things you don't. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I've always been one who suffers from FOMO. If as you listeners who don't know, that's the fear of missing out.
Yep.
As I suspect most of us do to some degree, some more than others. And it's certainly something that's compounded by social media. When you see others doing stuff, and in fact, it's the very ethos of what the companies use to get us to scroll more and stuff. And it's so easy to beat up and feel like, oh, I should get that. Particularly when you start comparing yourself to others, oh, look, they've got that house, that car, they got that promotion. And that just becomes a negative spiral for me. And I'm talking very personally here. I noticed it in myself. And it wasn't just social media. When I first set up the business, I decided to do certain things every day. I must read these articles. I must post here. I must do this. I must do that. And as time and I got busier, that in tray never cleared, and it began to hang on me. And it began to be like, I feel like I go to bed at the end of the night going, I haven't done all these things. And I had to stop and say, you're looking at this all wrong. Don't look at what you didn't do. What did you do today? Right? Be proud of those. Those are far more powerful. And actually, you made a choice in doing those because clearly they were solving a problem. They had a better objective than these things. And maybe these things aren't the right things. So actually, going through that thought process, I let go of those things that I didn't do and began to celebrate the things that I did do and took much greater comfort. And it's such a radical difference in my mental health, in what brings me comfort and what keeps me, I sleep a lot easier and sounder. Just letting go of that, it was a real difference for me. So it is definitely about the things you do, not about the things you don't.
Absolutely. It's a very hard learned lesson. It's not something that humans take to quite easily. We always fixate on the things that we haven't got, the things that we didn't do, instead of having that mindset of gratitude for the things we do have and the things that we have accomplished. So it is a very hard learned lesson, but a very good one that everybody should be following. So we've done your 10 lessons and they're fantastic. So thank you again. Let me ask you one final thing before we sign out. And that is, Ferris, what have you unlearned recently?
What have I unlearned? I've unlearned, a lot of it comes as tangents of the lessons that I have learned, particularly that last one.
Yeah.
But I've unlearned it's a bit like Marie Kondoing your learning and your life. I've unlearned the time fillers, the things that seemed important and entertaining back when I was a younger person, because maybe they brought an element of showboating, they brought an element of keeping up with the Joneses. I'm still doing it, but I'm unlearning those things, and my life is all the richer for it, right? It's amazing. It's like you say, that fear, giving it up is the hardest part. And then just stand back and enjoy the halo effect and the after effects of that wasn't really adding anything to your life. So there's lots of little things that I've slowly unlearned that add up to be big things.
That's true. Well, when you put it that way, that is very true. So let me ask you, what are you doing now? So where can people find Ferris Saranki?
So come join my tribe. They can find me. I hang out a lot on LinkedIn, looking up Ferris Saranki, or they can look me up on sheerghetto.com, which is the company website.
Yep.
And if they're in London, they can look me up. I'm a man who loves going for a coffee, getting to know new people, virtually or in person. So just drop me a line, look me up, and I'll make myself available.
Well, thank you, Ferris, and it has been an absolute pleasure sharing your 10 lessons today. I've learned something, and that's why I love doing this show. I always learn something. And you've been a fantastic guest. And we'll finish here today. You've been listening to 10 Lessons Learned. Our guest today has been Ferris Saranki, founder, CEO, and strategist for ShareGhetto Consulting. This episode is supported, as always, by the Professional Development Forum. And what we would like to ask you is, if you enjoyed today's show, please leave us a review or a comment. Please tell us what you think. of today's lessons. You can even email us at podcast@10lessonslearned.com. That's podcast@10lessonslearned.com. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode of 10 Lessons Learned, the only show on the internet making the world wiser lesson by lesson. Thank you for listening. See you at the next episode.